Welcome to the Common Man Football Show. My name is James Coburn, and today's episode, we're talking about the 2018 NFL Draft Wide Receiver Analytics Review. As many of you know, or at least you're familiar with this channel from the top 5 videos that I did back in May, actually. And I've gotten a lot of feedback and comments but you need to update this. You need to update this. Okay, man, but keep in mind, the reason why I did those top 5 lists based on data was to basically give a synopsis of what happened in 2016. Because what happens in 2016 and what happens in 2017 are both important to a certain extent about a prospect. So, which we'll get into a little bit, but just to kind of explain the nuances. But there are definitely some wide receivers that were on the top 5 list going into the season that are not on this list today. And I'll get into that a little bit, but this video, we're essentially going to concentrate on, one, what the terms mean, and go down the list of all the wide receivers that popped statistically based on market share, basically production analytics. And I'll get into a couple of those little things as we go. But so first off, let's get into terms and definitions. So you might be wondering, okay, what does MSPY mean? MSPY is passing yardage market share. What passing yardage market share is you take individual receiving yardage and you divide it by the team total yardage. So for example, if a wide receiver had 1,000 yards in a 4,000 yard offense, then that wide receiver and receiving yardage specifically and passing yardage by the team, then that wide receiver has 25% MSPY. So it's pretty self-explanatory what market share is, but I just think people don't talk about it a lot, or at least not everybody's familiar with it. Is the basic point. But that's what MSPY is, and that's by far the most important aspect to wide receiver evaluation is MSPY, because wide receivers are in different types of offenses. Some of them are in really pass-happy offenses. Some of them are in run-happy offenses. So you have to really just get a gauge of how they are relative to the passing that their team has. And we'll get into a little bit of this with certain players that people have been kind of negging on for whatever reason that don't really need to be negged on. But that's basically the gist of what passing yardage market share is. And then, of course, we get into MSY, which is individual total yardage, which is receiving plus rushing yardage of an individual player, divided by team total yardage. So it's the same thing as MSPY, but instead of receiving yardage divided by passing yardage of the team, you're taking total yardage, receiving plus rushing, and dividing it by the total yardage of the offense. So that is essentially what you're doing based on that. So let's get to the list. So these are all the players that popped statistically when it comes to their MSPY or passing yardage market share. So first off, we'll get into the players that hit 5-time All-Pro level. Since 1969, this area of MSPY, so we're talking 38.74 and up, that's the area where where the majority of the 5-time All-Pro wide receivers were when it comes to market share. And majority meaning 95% of every 5-time All-Pro wide receiver hit this area of production. So we're talking about guys like Randy Moss, we're talking about Jerry Rice, any 5-time All-Pro wide receiver that you could think of, 95% of them hit this area of production since 1969. The next area is the 3-time All-Pro to 5-time Pro Bowl area of wide receivers. So this area here from 33.90 to 38.07, and it doesn't have to be 100% rigid, if you will. There's some leeway. So there are some guys, some wide receivers that are kind of in between that could still fall into that area. But this is essentially the area where 95% of 5-time Pro Bowl and 3-time All-Pro wide receivers ended up, was this production area. And then everybody else, so everybody from from 30% and up, those players are where 95% of the 3-time Pro Bowler players ended up. 3-time Pro Bowl players, just to give an example, are guys like Dwayne Bowe, Mike Wallace, for example. These are recent examples, guys, by the way. But that's essentially the types of wide receivers you're talking about. So guys that are above average, high quality, but not necessarily elite, not necessarily guys that went on to have fantastic careers. Or not, I mean, they had good careers, but the like rare of the rare type careers, if you will. So those are all the wide receivers that hit into that particular area. So let's get into highlights essentially. So these are wide receivers that you need to be familiar with. First off is DJ Moore from Maryland. DJ Moore has incredible total yardage market share. He's a junior. Film-wise, he does stick out a lot to me. I think he's a very good route runner. Has speed, can do a lot of interesting things. So he's definitely a wide receiver that I think you should be familiar with. When it comes to seniors, Cedric Wilson from Boise State is another big standout when it comes to seniors, as is Michael Gallup from Colorado State. So Michael Gallup has made an appearance on the top 5 wide receivers and this list as well. So Michael Gallup continued to have a very good productive year. And then we get into the controversial Mr. Calvin Ridley. I have gotten a ton of comments and people tweeting about how Calvin Ridley's production is not good and how production doesn't matter and all this stuff. Calvin Ridley hit a 3-time All-Pro production mark in terms of passing yardage market share. I don't know what else you want from a wide receiver to be. I mean, sure, you'd want him to hit the 5-time All-Pro level. I mean, sure, but Calvin Ridley hit a very high-quality production mark. Because again, we're not talking about total receiving yardage. We're talking about market share. How much of that passing game did they make up? How much were they dependent on to get the job done in the passing game? And Calvin Ridley has been depended on at a level where normally you end up being a high-quality wide receiver. Like every high-quality wide receiver had this particular trait. The majority of them, 95% plus, had this particular data trait. So I really don't want to hear people talk about Calvin Ridley and how he's not productive and how production doesn't matter and you just watch the tape. I don't need to just watch the tape. I mean, sure, watch the tape. But don't get into arguments where you're arguing over something and you have no idea what you're talking about. Because that's really what's happening right now. The fact that people still talk about wide receivers and yardage, like they bring up, well, he had 1,000 yards. If a wide receiver has 1,000 yards in a 6,000-yard passing offense, that's a lot different than a wide receiver that has 1,000 yards in a 300-yard offense. It's a big difference. It's a big difference in terms of roles. It's a big difference in terms of who the defense focuses in on. You know, because if you are a defense and you have a wide receiver that's making up 40%, 50% of the passing yardage of that offense versus a wide receiver that's only making up, say, 20%, 15%, who is the bigger threat? Who are you actually going to try to stop? The 50% guy. So just keep that in mind, because I know a lot of you guys have, not all you guys, but it's just an argument that I just think it comes from a place of ignorance about data. It comes from a place of just not wanting to learn, educate yourself. So hopefully this video kind of educated you, at least to that. So again, those are the main highlights though. So those are pretty much the big highlights I wanted to show you. The rest of the list is here, of course. If there are wide receivers on this list that are not here, I would check back to my videos, the top 5 videos that I made back in May. And I'm going to do another video that's going to be a little bit more nuanced to give you better perspective. Because the one thing you have to understand is every year of production a wide receiver has is important, is significant. Because you are going to have wide receivers that have terrible last years in college, but had very good years the year prior, and they end up having good NFL careers. You're going to have that happen. And the only way to know that is by having data, by paying attention, treating every data trait as its own entity, as its own piece of information in the puzzle that is draft evaluation. So hopefully you guys understand all this stuff. And of course, my name is James Coburn. You can find my other work at draftcoburn.wordpress.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at Geometrics. And if you like this content and you want more content like this, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Share this video as well with anybody that you know. And I will talk to you guys in the next video. Peace.